Have you ever considered what happens when you die? I think it's something almost every human goes through at one point or another in their life. And I think it makes for an interesting jumping off point if we're going to be talking about the new anime Remonster. While what actually happens through the reincarnation process, if that happens to exist, is not the core premise of the show, it does actually create the jumping off point that we use if we're going to look at what's happened to the main character. Because our main man, who ends up being called Gabro, has definitely experienced a reincarnation situation, and he has gone from being a human in what looked like a relatively modern society to being a goblin. Now, the first thing we need to talk about if we're going to talk about Gabro and the story in general is how he died, because he didn't die by the traditional truck coon coming by and going meep meep and running him over. Instead, what we've got is the situation where this man has been brutally murdered by somebody in cold blood. We see the full hot action of that going down. It is one of the first sequences we see right away, and it tells us that regardless of the world he was in or the world he's in now, this is a dog-eat-dog situation, and this is not going to be easy. Now, as he comes into this new world, the interesting thing about Gabro and his reincarnation and the impact that it has on the story is that, first and foremost, he is able to actually recall all of his memories, who he was, and that kind of thing, which means that he is a goblin who can think like a human, and we see this utilized very quickly and with very good results. We see him striving to create weapons and other tools to help improve his environment. We also see him interacting with characters and actually trying to use something akin to human reasoning and various trials and errors of doing that, and what that does for him or against him in certain situations. The other really important thing that we see with Gabro at the start of the show is that he hasn't just brought human sentience with him. The other thing that he actually has, and that is really interesting, is if Gabro consumes something, he is able to actually obtain skills or abilities through that consumption. And apparently this is something he had in his past life and that he's very aware of. And he seems quite happy about the fact that it's come with him. Now, in its execution in the actual show, it looks similar to something like Rimuru gaining skills in That Time I Was Reincarnated as a Slime, or even something like Jinwoo unlocking stuff in Solo Leveling. So I thought that was really cool, and I think that it adds a much more interesting dynamic to what's actually making this man so particularly special and unique, because not only does he obviously have the potential for humanity, but he also has these interesting powers that he is obtaining through doing the thing that essentially it seems goblins do best, which is eating everything in their path. But it doesn't just stop with the powers themselves. They in themselves are interesting, but what really makes this stand apart for me is the idea of what those powers mean to him and how he notices them impacting him as a person. Apparently, from what he's telling us in episode 1, he feels that he didn't really have a lot of warmth or empathy as a human. And as he gets to spend more time with the goblins, and as he builds and establishes relationships with people within his new little tribe or clan or whatever, he notices that he actually feels a lot more human, warmth and empathy and stuff toward them than he would have toward people in his past life, which is an interesting inversion of what we would normally expect to see. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to see some kind of cultural night and day situation where the goblins are suddenly going to just instantly start behaving exactly like humans. And that's a good thing, because the idea that the goblins should instantly behave as humans is kind of illogical and puts forward this air of superiority toward humans that would kind of make the point of telling a story through a goblin point of view seem kind of pointless. One of the things I'm really looking forward to seeing in this story particularly is how the actual goblin society will advance, because to me it seems like you've got one scoop of That Time I Was Reincarnated as a Slime on one hand, and 1 scoop of Goblin Slayer on the other hand, almost like they're a pair of scales and we're weighing things out. So it'll be really interesting to see just which angle of like a monster society we're actually going to wind up seeing here, or whether we're going to get something totally different. Another thing I think the show did really well is that it immediately establishes that there is Gobro, but that he also ends up having 2 friends that we've developed very early on. There is Gobkichi, who is the biggest, most powerful, and strongest goblin from basically word go, when all the little goblins are being raised together. And one of the things that Gobro does, which is kind of funny, it kind of makes me think of like prison comedy movies or something. He is like, okay, this guy is super big and super strong, so the first thing I'ma do is I'm gonna find a way to team up with him. And fortunately, that doesn't seem to initially be that they're fighting each other the way you'd see either in a prison film, or like if somebody comes into a new school and is like dealing with the school bully or something. But we do actually see that the 2 of them end up teaming up, and that Gobkichi's strength and Gobro's actual intelligence work together to make for quite a good team. And they're doing all right with this until eventually a female goblin named Gobmi actually approaches them and is like, hey, can I learn how to do that? And the boys think about it for half a second and are like, sure. So that picks up our 3rd member. And I think they're doing a pretty good job with her character so far. I'm quite happy with how they're doing her. Because, like, it can be really difficult to find this balance where you have interesting characterization for a female character in a show like this. And, I mean, it's only been 1 episode, so we'll see how things go as they progress, but she was holding her own. They were having her do things like use a crossbow to help fight and giving her poison arrows, as opposed to trying to make her rely on physical strength, which wouldn't make a lot of sense for the situations that they were in. I also like how they all work together, and the 3 of them eventually actually start bringing food in for the other members of the tribe, and that starts to show how the leadership for Gobro is actually going to evolve, which is really interesting. And while we're on the topic of evolving, one thing I will say is that it's really cool that we've gotten to see him go from being a baby to maturing into an actual like teen or adult goblin. And then as we see the leveling stuff happening and the skill stuff happening that I was talking about before, one of the things that happens throughout this course of this episode is that Gobro, Gobkichi, and Gobmi all eventually evolve. And in the case of the first 2, they look really cool, and like they end up dueling each other just to like see how their actual strength is improving and stuff, which was fun. And of course, at the end of the episode, Gobmi's evolution is used for laughs, which, I mean, it was fine. It wasn't terrible or anything. She looks much more feminine and more like human-esque, and she's all blushing and stuff, and it was pretty cool. So I really do like how these first 3 characters have been introduced to us, and I hope that we get to continue to see their dynamic evolve as the show actually goes on. I hope that we don't see too much of them getting pushed into the sidelines, but we'll have to see just how many characters come into the story and how complex it actually becomes. So I don't want to get too attached to anyone too early, but my initial impressions of the cast are pretty positive. One person that I think that Gobro should keep one eye open for in the series, though, is the actual Goblin Chief Elder. I think he is going to potentially be a problem. We see him caring for the baby goblins in the beginning of the show, but that makes perfect sense because they're infants and they can't do anything for themselves yet. We also see him informing them on day 4 of their existence, because these things mature very quickly. We see him telling them that, like, basically, you're on your own, it's time for you to get your own food. And then we, as I was saying earlier, we see how Gobro and his friends end up, like, altering that hierarchy, which is quite interesting. But it is actually from this Goblin Elder that we actually originally, like, learn more about how the evolution system works, outside of Gobro's own unique capabilities from his past life. And initially the chief is like explaining to them and is telling them what goes on and everything, but when Gobro and Gobkichi actually evolve, the elder does not seem incredibly happy about this. And we've already seen a certain level of strife among the goblins dealing with Gabro and his friends because of their success, where Gabro is actually sleeping and a whole horde of the goblins actually try to attack him. But he has a search skill that he has activated even while he's sleeping, and is able to preempt the attack and save himself and make sure nothing happens. So yes, keep one eye open, Gabro, because that man may very well be coming for you. But that would make for interesting plot, and it would make for a distinction in characterization, which is something that would actually help and enrich the show. Now, everything here has probably seemed like it's been sunshine and roses, and like I've been singing this show's praises, and I am really enjoying it based off of this first episode. I'm definitely looking forward to going back and seeing more. But I also feel that I would be remiss if I didn't tell certain viewers out there about something that they might want to know about before they decide whether or not they want to watch this. And that is about a section where Gabro goes into a storage section inside of the goblin's home, and what he finds in there as he is looking for parts to potentially make weapons is instead a bunch of captured human females. We don't actually see some kind of like brutal rape scene in this opening episode the way that we did with the first episode of Goblin Slayer, but we do see the aftermath of human women being captured. We do see one which to me looked to be potentially pregnant. We do see the fact that they are naked, and the most striking thing to me actually was an artistic choice in the way that they portrayed these characters, and that is that they didn't actually show the women's faces. They showed their bodies, they moved up, and then they shadowed the faces out, as if all of their humanity, their soul, and their identity had been utterly stripped away. I thought that was a really powerful choice, but as I was saying before, I also think that this is something where some people are really going to need to know in advance, because that could make somebody really uncomfortable, and based off of what I have heard from researching this particular show, it seems like there is the potential that we are going to get other uncomfortable scenes in the future. I will alert people to these in my discussions of the show if they happen, and I will see how they are for me and how I deal with them and stuff, and obviously I'm going to be seeing whether or not the show works for me in general, because so far I'm enjoying it, but I mean, if it goes and just turns into episodes where that is what it's covering the whole time, that would definitely be a problem. But for now, everything seems like it's alright. I expected that issue to at least be brushed on, because this is a goblin culture, and that is a established part of goblin lore, so it makes sense that it is at least being noted or addressed. It would be dishonest if it wasn't. But I wanted to make sure that I did cover it here. And I think that will wrap up my thoughts on the first episode of Re-Monster. I'm quite impressed with what I've seen. I like the characters, I like the setting, I like the way that the world is evolving, I like the way that the powers are being discussed and explained to the audience. So I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes from here, provided of course that they don't actually overdo the aspect that I was talking about a couple minutes ago. Anyway, I'm wondering, have you guys watched Re-Monster? Do you have any interest in watching it? What did you think of episode 1 if you did watch it? Did you read the manhwa for this? At any rate, I think that we're done with our discussion here, and I will see you guys in the next video. Talk to you later. Bye!